Hi, this is a lecture supplement to the Executive Black Belt course, week 5, and it covers slides starting at 169 through the end of week 5. And this is on process mapping. I'm going to go very quickly through this, largely because I believe that most people, if not all, who are in the Executive Black Belt class, including the Executive Green Belt class, know something about process mapping. If that's not the case, please do not hesitate to contact me at, and I'll just write this up on the board at the moment here. Please don't hesitate to call at, or to contact me at mzabel@straightlineps.com. Okay? Love to hear from you, and if any of this is foreign to you, then or confusing, just call me and we'll help straighten it out. Okay, so again, I'm going to go fairly quickly through this, but you know, many of us have been, certainly if we're into the tools of the trade, if we're process people, making a process map is sort of like almost the basic blocking and tackling, if you will, of process improvement. And it's one of the basic blocking and tackling techniques. So what we're going to do is we're going to just talk through. Essentially, I want to talk through what are some of the types of flowcharts or process maps, we want to talk about how we can develop complete and consistent process maps that we can use to communicate, to analyze, and to find and fix problems, to illuminate where we should be collecting more data, to get buy-in for what we need to do or what we've done, and so forth. All right, so this is just going to be a short coverage. I don't claim that it's totally that it's comprehensive. Where do you find process maps? Well, you find them all over the place, but where we're talking about it right now is maybe in creating an as-is process map. Exactly how you make to-be process maps can depend on the context, and we can talk about that. Some people call them future state. There's also future state value stream maps, which are related to this. But anyway, we're talking about making as-is process maps in this particular section. So let's start off by talking about sort of why would we use a process map, and I think the answer should be fairly clear to us, and I talked about it a little in a fairly detailed fashion already, that a process map, seeing that it's a visual display, I'm actually going to put my pointer back on here, seeing that it is a visual display, wait a second, I have a better idea. Seeing that it is a visual display, you know, we can use process maps for different reasons, right? So we actually get to see whatever that entity is, how it flows through in various places, right? So we can say first, we can also talk about, for example, we can use it to identify what that sequence of steps is. We can also talk about where that sequence starts and stops, what decisions are along the way. Usually people use diamonds for decisions and boxes for process steps. And there's a lot more to it with Visio. You can add lots and lots and lots of different symbols. I like to keep it to a minimum, and we'll talk about that just as we go through. But we can also, what's neat about it is we can identify perhaps where errors are occurring, like what happens if we had errors there. Errors. We can point them out, right? Or we can say, maybe I want to collect data. Maybe I want to collect data there. I can see that this is a little bit slow. I might want to collect data there. Okay, and so forth. Okay, so we can use it for that, but we can also use it to aid in communication, right? Because we can get everybody on the same page to say this actually is what the process looks like. In reality, a process map is just a model, just like anything else is. It's a model of how the process actually works. It's not really how the process works. It's a model of how the process works. So we all know that if we went down to by the employee, we might find, or even by the particular instance of the employee doing it, we might find that employees do things differently every day. Every time they execute a process, they might find slight differences. We want to get that process map at the level that makes sense for us to solve problems, and no deeper than that. Okay? The idea isn't to say here's what reality is. The idea is to say let's get it to a level to say this approximates reality well enough so that we can make decisions on what to fix, where to collect data, and what the future state of this process might look like. Okay? Here are some typical symbols. I like the symbols on the left-hand side, the process step, the decision diamond, the starter endpoint, and I also use off-page connectors because I like to not make super duper complex process maps on any one page. If I want to go to the next page, I'll make an off-page connector so it's easily communicated. The ones on the right are other things that sometimes people use. Some people use cans for databases, that little D symbol for delays, and or the OR gate, or I'm sorry, an AND gate, if you're into electronics, and then reports generated, sometimes paperwork, so forth. All right, let's talk about before we kind of talk a little bit more. Let's talk about the types of process maps. So, process maps are things that you can make in various places at various times in the process. So we all know that, for example, a SIPOC is a type of process map. I'm not going to go through that again, but a SIPOC is very often very good in the beginning of a project because it just gets our bearings on sort of what the scope of the project is, what the basic flow is, where the problems might lie, and where we might collect data. But there's other types of process maps that may be more helpful. There's what's called a top-down process map. There's a linear process map, which will be similar to just an ordinary, what we normally call a flow diagram or a flow chart. This is probably the most common and the most conventional. There's an opportunity flow chart, which often breaks things up into value-added, non-value-added. Sometimes that can be very helpful. Or happy path and exception. That's another way I think about it. And then finally, there's a swim lanes one. And what I should tell you is I think that my personal opinion, now this is opinion, guys. All right, my personal opinion is that this is basically the order that you should do these, that you should consider doing these, okay? A lot of people start from a SIPOC and jump right to a swim lane diagram. Bam. They don't do a high-level value stream map. They do right to a swim lane diagram. I think sometimes this can get us in trouble because the breakdown may or may not be helpful, and swim lane flowcharts can be very complex, very, very fast. So, so I would recommend starting with a top-down and then maybe working your way down into this, depending on how quickly you want to do, how valuable the linear one might be, and so forth. Okay, let's start out with a few guidelines, and this is kind of goes for just about any process map, sort of advice that we can talk about. You can add your own to this as well. This is just sort of advice that I have kind of coming off of both the top of my head and some experience. Number one, start from a very high level. Build your ownership and shared understanding first with the team. Problem solving comes later. Don't try and solve the problems right away. And make sure that you involve the appropriate stakeholders. That is so important. If possible, before you do the process mapping, walk or observe the process somehow beforehand. go out with a clipboard and just take notes, or go out without a clipboard and just kind of observe it, see what people do, what they don't do before you have the processing session. I like facilitating with the team using if I'm live and on the spot. I like facilitating with the team with sticky notes and butcher paper rather than projecting and using a computer program like Visio, doing that directly. I know a lot of people like doing Visio directly. What I find is that when that happens, if you're the facilitator or if you're the person who's manning the Visio, there's two things that can happen. One is you become the bottleneck. There's a few things that can happen. One is you become the bottleneck. Number two is you become the voice for what really happens, because it's hard for people to contradict the person who's driving. Or it's harder for it. Not for everyone, for many people and even most. And then third is there's also, when you start putting things into Visio, there's also cost associated with redoing the process map, or moving one step from one place to another, or taking out a step that you think doesn't really exist or is not profitable to have in there. And because of that, it becomes a mental barrier. So, for example, if you have something in Visio and you have the structure and it's already up, there's a reluctance of people to tear it apart, as opposed to if you have sticky notes, there's less of a reluctance. It's very easy to pull them up, put them different places, and so forth. All right. Butcher paper is just something, it's like a long roll, right? So you can stick it up on a wall and then you can roll it up afterward. They sell that either at butchers, but increasingly now at places like Staples or Office Depot, they'll have a long roll of paper that you can roll out, roll back. Don't use too many symbols. It's just confusing. Remember, flowcharts are meant to communicate, not to be reality. Okay, so something that's simpler to communicate, that's great. If the distinction of one symbol versus another is helpful, use it. Otherwise, don't. Here's a very difficult one. Try and keep a consistent level of detail throughout the map. Okay, so don't, for example, if you are process mapping out how something is ordered at McDonald's, you wouldn't have cook food and then 10 or 15 steps on giving the food to a customer. You wouldn't have one step for cooking the food and then 10 or 15 for delivering to the customer. Okay? Try and keep it at the same level on one process map. If you need to do more detail on one area, do a drill down. And then finally, make sure that you validate the process map with the available appropriate stakeholders. And validate is maybe a strong word. Again, going with the idea of models, make sure that it's useful. Is it more or less correct at the level that it's at? Okay, keep it simple and readable so that's easily grasped. We'll have some other guidelines when we go along. We look at some of these process maps. I do want to say one other thing, and it's sort of like a facilitation trick. When you're actually doing this, you might pretend that you're the entity that's going through. So if it's a patient, you might pretend you're the patient when you're facilitating and say, okay, I'm patient Joe. First I do this. Tell me what it is. And then what happens? And then what happens? And then what happens to me? If you pretend that you are the thing that's going through, a lot of times people can communicate to you as if you're that thing. Even if you're a piece of paper or a database file or something like that, the technique works. If you're, I mean, take it if you're like a piece of paper or an application. You say, I'm the application. What's the first thing that happens when I go to a customer? Well, they fill you out. Great. So I get filled out, and then what happens? Etc. It's a nice little technique. Anthropomorphize things people can relate. Okay. Let's take a look at a couple more. Oops, I'm sorry. There's my pen. Let's take a look at a couple of these process maps. So a top-down is an excellent process map that I find very few people using, and I like it because I can put it right in Excel very easily. I'm an Excel lover. But essentially what you do is you take the SciPoc and kind of flip it on its side, right? So if this is the P in SciPoc, you flip it on its side, and then you build one level down from each of these. Again, there may be some complexity as to step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. Maybe some of these are concurrent or all that. You're simply, very much like in a work breakdown structure, in project management, you're simply saying, okay, here are all the items. For example, in this one, this says this is for compliance reporting, where the main functions are receive the request, forward to reporting groups, complete the reports, consolidate them, send them to the DOI. Those are the 5 basic things that we have to do. Then you ask, okay, within receiving the request, what are the basic things that you need to do within there? Well, I need to take the fax, phone call, or email. I need to log it into the database. I need to send an acknowledgement to the person who sent it to me. And there may be other things that I need to do as well. And so forth. It's an excellent way to start out before you go into doing a more detailed flowchart. Let's take a look at the next one, which is your basic linear flowchart. And for this one, what I've done is I've got a, this one happens to be for booking a flight on an online. Now it doesn't say a lot, but let's just kind of walk through it. So again, this is fairly simple flowchart. I did it to just be illustrative. We're starting over here. The first thing is I need to log on to the particular site. I don't know if you use Orbitz or Priceline or whatever. Let's say I'm using Orbitz. I log on to Orbitz. And if I'm not new, I've already done this before, I'd simply enter my flight information. Okay. I generate some available flights. And if I don't need to try other airports, I simply select a flight. I confirm my flight info. And then I book the flight. And I'm done. That's what I call the happy path. The happy path is on the top. And for all the exceptions, I go below it. Okay? So, for example, if I am a new subscriber, I need to do some things. If I do need to generate, if I do need to try other airports, like let's say I fly out of Ithaca, New York quite often, but it's a very small airport, so I sometimes look for places like in Syracuse or Rochester, New York, or Binghamton to see if there are other flights available to me, or sometimes even Philadelphia, if there are other flights available to me. If I need to make other purchases, I confirm the flight info. If I need to make other purchases, then I might have to reserve a car or hotel or whatever and book all the other items. Okay, so these are the exception paths. So one thing that's pretty evident here is there's a clear direction to this. So let me talk about some of the good features of this. You'll notice that there's, and some of it are not so good because I've had to smash them onto a PowerPoint page with a title and all the rest of that stuff. But one of the things that's nice is it says what the process is. It has a general header. This is booking an online flight. It says who the creators were. This was the web PI team, whatever that is. And it says the date of creation. I created this on 2/27/2008. All that's kind of helpful because it puts it in context. Maybe things have changed since 2008. Okay, so we know how sort of relevant this flowchart is. Second, it gives a key. It says what each of the symbols means. Third is it doesn't use too many symbols. And the fourth, and maybe this is the most important, well, it's all at the same, the fourth one, it's all at the same level. We don't have super duper details one place and scant details in another. And then finally, it has a direction to it. So by looking at it, without taking too long, you can quickly ascertain there's a direction to this. It goes left to right, and exceptions go top to bottom. Okay? So, it has some good features. That's a linear flowchart. Now, sometimes linear flowcharts can be turned into, sometimes directly, into what's called an opportunity flowchart. So in an opportunity flowchart, what we're doing is we're looking at, whoops, went backwards and forwards. There we go. Let me stay there. In an opportunity flowchart, admittedly, we're missing some things here, right? Because I don't have a key for the color or the symbols, or the who did this and the date. Okay, but the features that I want you to see is, first of all, it does have a direction, and it has a line here that kind of divides the top and bottom that says, okay, here's what is the process when it works well, and here are the opportunities that we can look to maybe make improvements. So that's what it is. It's kind of like showing where the opportunities are to make improvements. Now, if you've done this happy path versus non-happy path, sometimes it's self-evident and you can see it very easily. Other times people will take a linear flowchart like this and circle different areas. Like I might say, well, you know, here is where we have a real problem because when people are new subscribers, they often drop out of the process. So we're going to look at this right here as our biggest opportunity. Okay, so anyway, this one happens to be for a process for seating and serving a customer. And so what I've got here is I've got seating the patron. Is the seat available? Oh, it's not. We put your name on a list and you sit in the lobby or the bar. And we just know from experience that there is a lot of churn and customer dissatisfaction in that particular area. And there's, you know what, there's no value add when we say your name's on the list. Nor is there value add when we don't have the ingredients and have to cancel the ticket. Or when we put the order together for, say, a family and we're missing certain things. I don't know if you're like me, but I hate going to a restaurant where you make the order and it's delivered over the course of, say, 20 minutes where everybody's getting their different orders. My son gets his first, and then my daughter gets hers 5 minutes later, then I get mine, and my wife gets hers. And, you know, my son is done before any of us even start to eat. It's a problem. Maybe in some cases it's not a problem, but for me it is. So that might be a place where I might want to look for improvements. Anyway, nice little view. Can make it pretty clear. All right, and here's the swim lane flowchart. Some people call these deployment flowcharts, so just be aware of that. Swim lanes are becoming so ubiquitous now that many people think it's the only flowchart. It's not, and it can be very complicated very fast. So just be aware of that. Here, in this case, we've got process steps that are segmented by which, in this case, which branch of the business or which area of the business is executing on these. So, for example, the home office does an awful lot of the work up front, but they ping HR once in a while, and the department office is the one that makes the final approval. These are great for perhaps finding where there's a lot of back and forth or lack of ownership of a process. Sometimes they can be, one of the reasons why they're so ubiquitous is because they're helpful in illuminating where problems are. But having said that, they can be very, very complex very fast, and if they don't communicate well, they're not really going to set you up for making those improvements. So do try the other ones first. I would suggest usually doing certainly a top-down first before going into a swim lane, or even a top-down and a linear before going into a swim lane flowchart. But again, it just shows the sequence of steps in here. In this case, I've simplified this greatly by not putting in any decision diamonds. So this might even be just the happy path that's there. Okay, and we've already talked through this, but just a few features on a flowchart must have, and I've broken some of this. You might want to look back and see in the flowcharts I've got where I've made some mistakes. Flowcharts really need to have header information. If they're going to be published in part of a control plan, they need to have the process name, the names of the people who created it, the last date of update of when it was updated. All flowcharts need to have a clear direction, left to right. This one is violated all the time. People go left to right and back to left again. Very, very difficult to follow the flow of those. I do understand that there's always challenges getting things onto a single page or even multiple pages. That's the cross that we have to bear when we're doing process mapping, that we have to find some way to communicate. Most people, I think your two choices are top to bottom and left to right. Most people these days do left to right for various reasons. One is that if you're thinking about butcher paper, you can get it all onto a wall in, say, a room, and the left to right seems to make sense. Most people think of time as traveling from left to right, so that tends to work. Up to down, from top to bottom is okay too, but you should use your own style guides if your Department of Process Excellence has them, and have one. Bottom line, though, clear direction to every flowchart that you make. Third thing is consistent level of detail. So again, don't be real detailed in one place, not detailed at another. Start endpoints need to be identified, and you want to have 100% closed loops. If you don't, maybe that means that there's a real hole in the as-is process. That's okay. But you don't want to have things that are left open just for the sake of leaving them open. If they really do need to be, if they really aren't closed in reality, it's good to point that out. Some things that are nice to have is to number the steps and to have a symbol key. The symbol key is a must-have if you're using lots of symbols. If you're only using squares and diamonds, then it's probably not such a big deal. Most people can figure that out. Numbered steps are often very helpful, although when you start to number, you'll see how it's often very difficult to number, particularly in things like swim lanes. If you're doing multiple pages or multiple stages, you know, this is step 1.1.2 and 1.1.3 and all that. It can be a bit of a pain. Okay. Now, what are some of the things that you look for when you do flowchart analysis? Well, when we look at something, we're going to look at, for example, do we have an inefficient sequence of steps? Maybe we're making lots of decisions near the end of the process, or maybe we have some redundant steps, or maybe there's some back and forth, and maybe there's some authorizations. It can help us understand where defects are produced, where inventory buildups are happening, where there's rework, where there's delays. Let me just show you this very quickly by looking at, if we go back to slide 172, this was a process map that I actually had built for a client of mine, where they were hiring a contractor to do some insurance adjusting in some cases. And this is a real legitimate process map. You might think, oh my gosh, that's not deep enough. You know, I need to go deeper. But the point is we need to go deep enough to solve problems. So if we look at this, when an opportunity was identified, there was an original call that went into a department office, and they asked, do you have an employee available for this particular assignment? If the answer was no, they'd literally hire a contractor. They'd go out, they'd say, okay, we're going to hire a contractor. All right? If they did have an employee available, they'd assign that employee. After they hired the contractor, and believe it or not, this was the order, they'd say, okay, does this contractor have the right skills? The answer was no. They'd go back and call the department office again, but they just had a list of contractors. Whoops. The second thing, if he did have the right skills or she had the right skills, they'd set up the office, and if all the criteria were met, there was maybe 3 or 4 criteria, which sometimes were not met, in which they have to go through and do the whole thing over again. They'd get the signature from the big muck-a-muck up at corporate. Okay. Now the interesting thing is, there's this. You'll notice is a very inefficient order of steps, right? They're hiring somebody before they even know that this person has the right skills. Literally, that was one of the fixes, was to say every department office, every branch office needs to have an up-to-date understanding of and artifacts to support this, like an index. This was done in early 2000s, so it wasn't easy to just do this on the internet, but we provided them with essentially a catalog that was searchable by using some clicks, where you could identify who had what skills. Third thing is, don't set up the office before you know that they meet all the criteria. And finally, be darn sure that when it comes to signature time, that we've got all our ducks in a row. We're never going to have to go back. In fact, we might want to get that signature up front when we hire the contractor to begin with. Anyway, the point is it was deep enough to solve a number of problems and to greatly improve the process. We didn't need to go deeper than that, because remember, in the final analysis, what we're doing with a process map is not, our job is not as a historian, okay? We're not historians in the process excellence business. We're problem solvers. And so let's keep that in mind. Go as deep as you need to, but no deeper. Okay. So that's about it, folks. There's a couple of exercises at the end. I think you would do well to do the exercise 1 for hiring a new employee. We all probably think to enough of an extent we can understand sort of what needs to be done. But it'd be interesting to once you do that, go ahead and compare with another person in the class and see how it differs. And then exercise 2 is a nice one because that I'm asking you to take 20 minutes or less on. But this is a call center process for somebody who was for a company that sells budgeting software, and you might want to record by looking at this following process, which is given on slide 184, what you would do. Give a critique. Because there's no skin on the game. We don't know who in the game. We don't know who did this. But you might do a critique on 2 things. You might say, number 1, what's wrong with this process map? If you were doing a process map, what made it hard to read? What made it bad? What made it confusing? That might be one thing that you might want to talk about. Like, for example, I got it going left and right. I don't like that. Okay, that's one of the things. Second thing is, you might want to look into what are some of the things that are problematic with this. Just as an example, we find that there is a database here that people are documenting to. There is a spreadsheet that people are documenting to, and there's a logbook that people are documenting to. Are all these data sources necessary? Could they be consolidated? That's just one tiny tip of the iceberg. So it'd be interesting to say, well, let's find 10 things wrong with this or 20. This is not, believe me, this is not a pretty picture either in the way that it was done or in what's actually written there. Okay, so have fun with that, and I think you'll enjoy spending a little time with that. So what we really talked about in this module summary was how to develop a complete, consistent, as-is process map. We didn't talk about future state, but you should be pretty comfortable with saying, I can use this process for starting with a top-down and then going to a more detailed process map to get to a point where I can problem solve. We chose you how we talked about how to choose an effective type of flowchart when, and how to analyze the flowchart for some improvement opportunities. Again, if you have any questions whatsoever, you should contact me at mzabel@straightlineps.com, and happy to answer any of your questions. Hope you found this helpful, and we'll see you down the road.